Hi friends, good evening. Welcome to Shankaranaya Study Circle. This is Dr. Harinath Reddy, Director of the Institute. So today in this particular video we will discuss about the recommendations of a second Administrative Reforms Commission for making statutory independent regulatory authorities more effective. So, post 1990, in the era of LPG, liberalization, privatization, and globalization, to create a level playing field, to create competition, to protect the interests of consumers, etc., a number of statutory independent regulatory authorities were created. But in the working of these independent regulatory authorities, there are a number of problems. So, to ensure that the working of these independent regulatory authorities is more effective, a number of recommendations were made by the Second Administrative Reforms Commission in its 13th report on organizational structure of Government of India. So we will take up the discussion on the recommendations made for making the independent regulatory authorities more effective. See, the first dimension is appointment, tenure and removal. So for all these independent regulatory authorities, the chairman and members were appointed, they are given a tenure and they are sometimes removed. So with respect to appointment, tenure and removal, there is no uniformity among different regulators. So the commission feels that there is a need for greater uniformity in the appointment, tenure and removal. Why? Because all these independent regulatory authorities have been created with similar objectives and functions, and they also enjoy the same degree of autonomy. If that is the case, there is no need to have wide variance in terms of appointment, tenure and removal. That's one major observation made by the Second Administrative Reforms Commission. In addition, for appointing the chairman and board members, the process shall be transparent, credible and fair. And how this can be done? The appointment of the chairman and members of these independent regulatory authorities should be done by the union or the state governments from a panel of names on the basis of the recommendations of a selection committee. Neither the union government nor the state government should directly appoint the chairman and members. There shall be a selection committee on whose recommendations the government of India or the state governments have to act. And the composition of the selection committee should be defined in the laws which have created independent regulatory authorities. And the composition of the selection committee can be broadly in the pattern laid down in the Electricity Regulatory Commission Act 1998. That was one recommendation. And then if you see the tenure of the chairman and members of a number of independent regulatory authorities, there is a diversity. Instead of that, second ARC says, then let there be a uniform tenure of 3 years or 65 years, whichever is earlier. And then with respect to the removal of the chairman and board members, the removal of the chairman and board members shall be made uniform again. But before they are removed, sufficient safeguards must be put in place against arbitrary removal. In other words, there shall be an objective criteria which shall be laid down for the removal, and removal shall be for abuse of power, and before they can be removed, inquiry must be done, and consultation with the UPSC shall also be done. So these are the safeguards. Then interface with the government. So though independent regulatory authorities are created by the laws made by the Indian Parliament, though they enjoy autonomy from the executive branch of the government, to ensure that their functioning is effective, there shall be a kind of interface between the government and the regulatory authorities, so that each one can accommodate the requirements of the other stakeholder. So that's why interface with the government is recommended. And accountability of the independent regulatory authorities is also very important. See, all the independent regulatory authorities, if they want to retain their legitimacy and credibility, this is possible only when they remain accountable for the powers which they use. Many a times it is perceived that there is a trade-off between independence and accountability, which means If there is independence, there can be no accountability. If there is accountability, there is no independence, which is not true. Both are mutually reinforcing. So unless there is accountability, then there is no meaning for giving autonomy and independence. So greater the autonomy, greater the accountability on the part of the independent regulatory authorities. So that's why to create accountability in the working of the independent regulatory authorities, Second Administrative Reforms Commission has recommended oversight of Parliament over the working of the regulatory authorities. Now this is happening in the form of the independent regulatory authorities appearing before the parliamentary committees and also the departmental consultative committees. And in addition, they prepare the annual reports which are laid before the parliament. But instead, the commission says if there is an independent committee within the parliament, like the parliamentary standing committee for regulators, for independent regulatory authorities, so there should be a standing committee within the Indian Parliament for regulating the working of independent regulatory authorities. And this regulation must not be on the day-to-day activities of independent regulatory authorities, but the major decisions which they have taken. And that's why Second Administrative Reforms Commission says ensuring the accountability of the regulators to Parliament is desirable in a democracy. Since the regulators have to work in close conjunction with the concerned departments of the ministries, appearance before the departmentally related standing committees since the regulators have to work in close conjunction with the concerned ministries, appearance before the departmentally related standing committees of the Parliament will facilitate effective legislative oversight. So, Indian Parliament represents the sovereign will of the people. So, if the Parliament exercises very effective legislative oversight over the working of independent regulatory authorities, it goes a long way in improving the effectiveness of the working of independent regulatory authorities. And even earlier in 2007, we had a committee on financial sector reforms appointed by the then Planning Commission, known by the name High Level Committee on Financial Sector Reforms. It has recommended that the independent regulatory authorities in India, they must be subjected to evaluation, assessment by a body of reputed outside experts. So if there is a periodical evaluation and assessment of the working of the independent regulatory authorities, then the independent regulatory authorities will be on their toes, larger public interest and the consumer interest will be served. And then regulatory impact assessment. What does this mean? Before setting up of an independent regulatory authority for any sector, say for example, for healthcare sector, you can come up with an independent regulatory authority. For education, you can come up with an independent regulatory authority. For example, we don't have a regulatory authority for school education. So before a regulatory authority is set up for any sector, a cost-benefit analysis has to be done. So setting up of an independent regulator, does it serve any useful purpose? Are the costs more than the benefits? Are the benefits more than the cost? So this assessment must be preceded before the setting up of an independent regulatory authority. For example, if the costs of setting up of an independent regulatory authority likely outweigh the benefits, then better don't create an independent regulatory authority. Instead, you can look for alternative approaches for dealing with that particular sector. Then, setting up of a regulator should be preceded by a detailed review to decide whether the policy regime in the concerned sector is such that a regulator would be better placed to deliver the policy objectives of the department concerned. This I have already discussed. So that's it about recommendations made by Second Administrative Reforms Commission to make the working of independent regulatory authorities more effective. Thank you.